Hey you guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So today I kind of wanted to try and do a bit more of a talk through on the videos to show you a bit more of my process. So I always start out by just mixing up paints. The ones that I usually use are Apple Barrel, and I've also been using Angelus leather acrylic paints, which aren't specifically meant for painting polymer clay, but they actually work really well for it. The next thing that I usually do is I will pick out my brushes. This is kind of a crucial part to the process for me. It, especially when it comes to painting hands, you really want a fine tipped brush, something that's going to be able to get really small details in there, but also not add on too much product at the same time. I always start out by just painting little tiny bits of flesh right around the fingertips, and then I always work my way down from here. I usually try and keep my brush wet just so that it doesn't add too much of a saturation of color, and it allows a bit more for a bit of a gradient effect, which is really nice too. I'm a little bit obsessed with taking imperfections in the clay and just turning them into scrapes and cuts. Like this one was a little bubble that formed when it was baking, and I kind of just split it open, which ended up turning out really cool. I like this detail because it kind of adds on that whole I've been digging around in the dirt and then I just washed my hands and now my fingers are super red kind of effect. I know that's a little bit specific, but I've just really always liked hands to look like they were just doing something, or I think that's a bit why I have such a fixation with hands is hands do so much and we don't really, we don't really think about that too often. I do anyways. So going in more, this is all with the same color. I believe the colors that I used they're all packed up, so I can't actually, tell you the specific one that I had for the flesh tone at first. But it was just a Apple Barrel, I believe, brand of just peach colored. And then I mixed that in with the Angelus leather acrylic paints, the color in pink, and then a color in red as well. So I always do this bit. I will just start at the fingertips, go to the knuckles, and then work my way around the hand, basically just adding one color after the other. So we're still working with that first color that I showed mixing at the front. I'm just alternating between the really fine tipped brush to lay down the color. I always wipe it off on my hand too, just so that I'm not adding, again, super saturated amounts of color. I am very heavy-handed when it comes to painting in general, so I've really learned that adding on smaller layers and building it up is crucial when you're painting. You can't really be impatient about it, which I am not the most patient artist, which is why clay has been kind of a nice process for me to get used to. I've recently bought these sponges before quarantine at a craft supply store that we have in Portland called Scrap PDX, which I 100% recommend. I go there for everything. They have polymer clay there, they have paintbrushes there. Most of my paintbrushes, unfortunately, I won't be able to list down below actually, because they were primarily gifted to me, but I will do my best to try and find which ones I'm using. A lot of really good ones actually, like this one that I'm using here is actually a nail art brush. So those, you're gonna find the finest tips on those. Then like if you're searching wherever it is that you buy your paintbrushes, just search for nail supply art brushes and those would generally do well if you're painting something really tiny like this. But back to the sponge, I recently started using sponge in lieu of an airbrush, which I really wish that I had because it's kind of hard to work with paintbrushes to get a nice gradient of color. So the way that I've been doing this, you can't really see it in the video, but you kind of just dab a little bit of color onto one edge of the brush or on one edge of the sponge, dip it into water, and then kind of use that to blend it in. So now I'm gonna go into my next color. Oh, deco art. Okay, yeah, so I also use Americana deco art paints. These are great too. Again, I really did get most of these from that scrap supply store. But the Angelus acrylic ones, I did a Nike commission where I painted some Air Forces, and I've had these ever since and haven't really used them for anything else. And I decided I would try them out on painting clay, and I like them because they don't dry out as fast as traditional acrylic paints, and they also are a little bit more fluid, so they just work really, really well when it comes to adding color. So again, I kind of just darken the one color that I'm working with per skin tone. It really just, you want to blend up your colors based on the tone of clay that you're using. So for this kind of skin tone, I always start out with pinks, But if it was a deeper skin tone, which I'll do in the next video, you usually want to use oranges and browns as well as that peach color, but just use a little bit more brown than you normally would. You just want to adjust it based on the color of the skin that you're using. So I'm kind of just going in here and rubbing everything over with just a damp part of the sponge, and I haven't really added on more paint to it. So I really like this technique. Again, it's about the closest that I'll get on a budget to airbrushing, which eventually I will get, but I'm gonna need some help and suggestions on that, so I'll probably be browsing through YouTube a bit before I figure out which one to get. I know that Tina Yu, I actually was subscribed to her on Patreon before, and she's got some really invaluable information as far as airbrushing and different kinds of clay to use, so definitely recommend checking her out, as well as my YouTube, or I'm sorry, my Patreon. It's basically the same as these videos, but the process is going to be a lot more slowed down. Nothing is cut out from them, so you see what I'm doing actually from start to finish, which I think is a lot more instructive than just the quick run-throughs that I do on YouTube. So now I'm just adding the nice little knuckle bits. You could add these in, sculpting them in with the clay before you bake them, but I kind of like to do it this way because it gives it a bit more of a cartoony vibe, which I feel is something that is in my art style in general. I really like realism mixed with cartoony, so I always have those solid lines in there. It's just kind of a part of my signature art style, I guess, that I have developed over time. I've really grown to love it. Adding all these tiny details is kind of my favorite because I'm always, I don't know, I think it just brings life to it. This part cracked me up so much. I thought it was very cute. But yeah, I don't know, I really like this part of it because I feel like it's not necessarily that it's the home stretch, which with me being super impatient, that's kind of part of it if I'm being honest. But I really just like how things start coming together. And now I'm adding on fingertips, which again is something that you could sculpt in, but this is something that I think I've seen on anime. I became inspired by like having those really cartoony fingerprints, and it's cool because they come out different for every different kind of clay that I use. Like every different project is different and unique, so it's just kind of a really nice element to add into it. I love it. Again, this is the same color that I was using to add on the slightly more bruised color to the skin, and so I just use it without watering it down, and so it stands out a bit more against everything else. Really gotta have those fingertips on there. Fingerprints, you know what I'm saying? It's super unique. And this, as you can see, is like my favorite brush. I use it for all of my clay projects, and I will do a video later showing how I add on the designs and the tattoos. That brush is primarily the one that I will use for everything. So here I'm just mixing in a paint color that I'm going to use for freckles. And this is a new technique that I've seen done before. I want a bit of a firmer brush for this in the future, but it worked out pretty nicely for adding freckles. You kind of just add paint on there, add a little bit of water, and then flick it on there. And so I will add on different amounts of water just to get a different gradient in the freckles. But it came out pretty cool for my first try. I really like how it looks. I'm kind of obsessed with spots and freckles, adding them to the clay, because I feel like it just gives it a bit more life than, you know, not having them in it. It's a really cool element, super easy to add to. And so the last part, I'm adding on nail polish. This was really hard to keep in focus. I'm sorry about that, but this is my favorite part. I'm kind of obsessed with watching nail technicians on YouTube, so I was kind of being like a little faux nail technician. So we are coming to the end of the video. Let me know how you feel about these talk-throughs. It doesn't really take too much for me to do, as I'm a very, very chatty person, but I feel like it will be helpful in the future to kind of speak through my process, talk to you guys a little bit more, and I might potentially do, once I moved into my new apartment, I might potentially do a video of my studio space and kind of give you guys a walkthrough of all the products that I use. So let me know if you're interested in a video like that. Alright guys, I hope that you are doing well. I hope you're staying safe. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next video. I'm going to give you a quick little wave off here in a second after I finish showing you the details. Alright guys, until next time. Bye!